There was quite a journey of how this came to me. And it started right at the very beginning of holographic breathing, where I was quite ill, or very ill really, with Lyme disease. And it got to a point where I was almost bedridden, really. And then at that point, the holographic breathing came through. That just started in meditation one day. And this breathing started, and that gave me a lifeline to get better from the Lyme disease. I started improving. And because I was already quite a long, this is kind of around 2002, sometime like that. Because I'd already quite a long-term cranial sacral therapist, I would use the holographic breathing to fall back into my cranial fluid and to try and detoxify the brain and to clear that, because Lyme's disease attacks the brain. And I had an image of the cranial fluid as a cranial practitioner, which was, it is around the brain, it's in the ventricles inside the brain, then it's around the spinal cord, and then the thin layer inside the spinal cord. And that was it. That was my image of the cranial fluid. And I also had an image that it's very hard to get toxins out of the brain. It was a wrong image, but I just didn't know anything about it. And it came from the word, the blood-brain barrier. And I didn't really know what that was, but I'd heard people saying things like, oh, it's very hard to get toxins out of the brain because of the blood-brain barrier. Not true, but that image, that word produces a picture. It's not just a name, it is a picture. And also, I've been told within the cranial schools, I did 2 full-length cranial trainings, that the cranial fluids don't flow off through the nerves. And I also had an image of the nerves, which came from the name, the myelin sheath, which also produces an image. There's not a lot of fluid to the name, the myelin sheath. So I had the image of the nerves of not having much fluid in them. So there was that image, and there was what I had been taught of the cranial fluid. But when I did holographic breathing with it, it didn't open up in that way at all. I would feel the cranial fluid around my brain and in the ventricles, very easy, around the spine. And I would start with that, but almost instantaneously it'd move into the brain itself and within the spine. And it would just be, and I'd think, wow, it just feels to me that that isn't the only cranial fluid. It seems like the whole brain is full of that. And then it would release out through my nose. I said, well, I can literally feel that flowing off down through my nerves and out through my body with exactly the same quality as the cranial fluid in the brain. And as that was happening, that broke my whole image of how I'd been taught the anatomy in the cranial schools. It broke the image of the blood-brain barrier, and it broke my image of the myelin sheath. I could feel the toxins. There's a lot of neurotoxins build up in Lyme disease, and I could literally feel those releasing out of the brain and down the spine and out through the nerves. And then, you know, from there, they just dissipate into lymph and make their way out through the body. And I suddenly, from having this image of the brain being enclosed and isolated and divided, I had this image of the brain connecting and the fluids of the brain connecting, not just as an image or as an energy. I had a feeling of that fluid literally doing that, and this wonderful feeling of my brain being able to detoxify. And there was the effect of the holographic breathing producing that. But also I realized me holding that image and those names was literally having an effect of stopping my brain being able to detoxify. An image is a very powerful thing. If you have an image of your brain that it can't toxify, one way or another, to one length or another, that is going to happen. Your brain is not going to detoxify as well as if you have an image of your brain easily being able to toxify and easily flow out through the nerves. And in my mind, it just felt so real. And obviously, I didn't go back to how I've been taught it from the cranial schools, excuse me, and how it is shown in the anatomy books, because it was the difference between me being alive or not. If I was at that point where I could very easily have died. So I just trusted in my own inner feelings and what it felt. And I didn't care if it was true or not, but it felt absolutely real. But in my mind, I thought it can't be true because of all of these anatomy books and all of these scientists and all of these cranial schools say it's this way. How would I be the only person saying it's different? So I just carried on with that in my own way. And then years later, when I started teaching that, the movement of the cranial fluid, I thought, well, I better check this out. And not from the pictures and the basic anatomy that's shown in the books, but the fundamental principles of the anatomy of how it works, how the cranial fluids are formed, the difference between the cranial fluid around the brain and the cranial fluids within the brain. They're exactly the same fluid. There is no difference at all. I was correct. How they flow out through the nerves, there's nothing to stop that fluid flowing out through the nerves. When you actually look into the anatomy, I thought, well, I could be right. It seems that I'm right. But you're thinking, well, how can I be right and every anatomy book be wrong? I come up against this a lot, really, different things that I do. And I at this time, I'd lost everything. I'd done a bad investment and I'd lost my home. And also just from Lyme disease, I couldn't do the work that I used to do as much of it. So I kind of lost my home and I lost everything. And I ended up in this van and I was just in nature traveling along this kind of magical route called the Ridgeway. Very wonderful energy and just living along there. And I started painting how I see the different areas of the cranial fluid, the different areas of the brain and the different structures, because all of the pictures in the anatomy book collaborate, or whatever the word is, how it is shown to be. And the more I drew it, the more I realized, well, I'm right. And then I started looking into, because by that stage, I understood all the underlying principles. And I started looking at what is being shown in the books. And I thought, that is a total lie. What is actually being shown. Do you notice how lying has been edited out of our vocabulary? It's okay to say, oh, it's an untruth, or they, I don't even, can't even say the name, they're being duplicitous, or they're creating their own reality. But to actually say, he's lying, and he's a liar, even though it's the same thing, you're not allowed to say that. It's completely edited, but I'm not in a mood for editing today. So to me, I thought that is a complete fabrication and a lie. And the people who have made that original image and pictures know that it's a lie, and then they've fabricated all of these different names to back up that original lie. And anyway, I went around telling everybody, nobody at all seemed to care. So after a while, I just gave up. I thought the cranial schools really ought to know about this, but they didn't seem to care. And anyway, I just taught my students in the end, and that is what I'm going to continue to do. And today, we're going to go through a meditation just to feel the difference between those two images of it being contained and divided and not traveling off down through the nerves, to it all being one fluid. And first of all, I'll teach holographic breathing, and then then we'll continue on in the same meditation, then give the visualization of the brain as it's shown in the anatomy books, and notice what that feels like. And then of the brain and the whole nervous system and cranial fluid as one fluid and flowing off through the nerves, and notice what that feels like. And then you have an image of being able to detoxify your own brain. It gives you a route of being able to feel your brain ventilate, and then you can feel what it feels like on your breath, how easily you breathe between those two images. And normally with this, I just teach the anatomy of how I show it. But in this one, I'm going to give the underneath anatomy as well. It's not an easy thing to do, especially as I'm teaching people how to do holographic breathing. It's not a particularly easy thing, but because it's on my mind, I will show how what is shown in the anatomy books is literally impossible. You will understand the basics, primary functions of how cranial fluids are produced and how they flow. And from that, it is easy just to see, well, how it's shown in the anatomy books is literally impossible. And in a way, for me, that's the competition. And for me, teaching what I'm teaching, I can say, well, look, this is how I see it working. But then everyone looks, say, well, the whole world and every anatomy book, other than you, Martin, says it's completely different. So I'm on a kind of a sticky wicket with that one. There was one school that saved me. I kind of got to the end of it, and I was speaking to Jeremy Gilby, who is the president of the Sutherland College of Cranial Osteopathy. And I said to him, I said, I feel as if I'm going crazy. I see the cranial, or experience the cranial fluid as this, doing this. I looked up all of the underlying principles of how it works, and it completely backs up how I experience it. But in the books, it's said in a different way, and all the cranial schools just follow the books. And he said, we teach it in the same way as you experience it. They have the same image. They think it's rubbish what is written in the anatomy books, but they're the only cranial school or cranial sacral school that I know of that does that. And also there's a driver behind this, in that I see what is pictured in the anatomy books as a global block. You know, people say, oh, there's nefarious forces which are stopping us advancing or ascending or evolving. What if everybody had a view of their brain, not just the people who knew the anatomy, but people who just had that image of the blood-brain barrier, or heard the word, which is an image, cranial fluid, or heard the word myelin sheath, and that was creating an image in them that was stopping them being healthy, was stopping them evolving spiritually, was stopping them being able to view their own mind. Because that is how I see it. In holographic breathing, we work with the anatomy, how it is, but we drop into the deeper levels of it, the energies of it, and the kundalini, and all of these things. And if you're picturing somewhere in a correct way, it's in an incorrect way, it's not going to work. And in the image as I teach it, because you're not just dealing with the fluid, you think about it. You just go to a school, cranial school, and you just work with the fluid around the brain and in the ventricles, which aren't actually in the brain. And you completely miss 3 times that amount of fluid, which is exactly the same fluid that you have access to. One, you're missing that potency, but also with the fluid within the brain, that gives you the ability to travel within the brain and experience the qualities of the brain and view the brain. And the brain is the anatomy of the mind and the intellect. So you lose the chance to be able to view the anatomy of your intellect and mind by this image, by how it's taught in different schools, by just that name, the cranial fluid. So in a way, this is a powerful webinar. If all I do, or if all this does for you, is that it changes your image of how you perceive your brain and cranial fluid, that is pretty massive as far as I'm concerned, because when it's viewed in the correct way, as it actually is, and I'm not going to teach you anything that cannot be researched or looked up in anatomy. Everything I'm going to show you, to my knowledge, is 100% true. But it will give you the ability to undo that lock for yourself. And up to you. You can, I mean, you don't even have to believe what I'm saying. You can look at the principles and decide what you would like to experience for yourself. So I don't want to be hold some kind of doctrine, or you've got to look at it like this. What I'm showing the anatomy as it is, and I'm offering a theory of how I see it working. And I'm saying whatever is shown in the anatomy books, or how they put together the anatomy book, is a deception. It's a lie. I have no idea how that lie or that deception has come about in the first place. But I find it amazing that everybody just keeps following along with it. Maybe it's comfortable for people not to view their intellect or the anatomy of their intellect, or to not to evolve and ascend and connect to the higher energies. Maybe that's very comfortable for people because it can keep you safe where you are. So maybe for the majority of the planet, that image is perfect because they don't have to start evolving, which I say automatically starts happening. If you start viewing the brain and cranial fluid as it is, it's almost impossible not to start processing and being with what's there. The same way if you view your heart, you start processing love. If you start viewing your pelvis, you start processing the potency and the sexual organs. If you start processing, if you start viewing the anatomy of your brain, you start processing the intellect and the ability to connect to the higher energies. See, I didn't know what I was going to talk about today, but that was it. That is what we're doing. Okay. Put your hands up if you haven't done holographic breathing before. Okay. Let me just go to another page. Okay. Well, there's a couple of people, 3 or 4 people, but so many people haven't got their screen. Oh, there's quite a few hands gone up of the screens that aren't showing. All right, so I'll teach holographic breathing. I'm not going to show you lots of pictures of the brain and cranial fluid to start off with. You'll just have to imagine a layer around the brain, around the spine, ventricles, spaces within the brain, down through the brain stem, down through the center. You just have to imagine that to get an idea. That will be good enough. And then we'll go into the anatomy and principles of that afterwards. Holographic breathing is what enabled me to feel and be with that. And absolutely, by the way, I spent 1.5 years making these paintings and pictures. So I was continually viewing my brain, the cranial fluid, the different glial cells, and you were viewing your own intellect then, especially with the myelinating glial cells, which are full of fluid and make what is called the myelin sheath, but I call that the myelin capillaries, because this is, to me, the connection between the intellect and the higher self. And I got to the last picture, and I painted that last picture. I couldn't paint before I started, and after that last picture, I couldn't paint again. And I made a video, I filmed a video, I never put it out. And I was just editing that video, and this energy started driving through my brain. I was completely terrified, and my Kundalini awoke and completely ruined my life ever since. I was completely terrified for a good 6 months, not really knowing what was going on. And I could do sessions, but I couldn't do anything else. Getting to the session was one thing, that was not easy, but doing the sessions were okay. So I could do a few sessions, and my whole life changed after that point. And a lot of that was just by viewing the anatomy of my intellect. So it does have a very real effect. Not that I can recommend you know, I think it was just meant to happen to me, whatever, all sorts of things. It wasn't just that, all sorts of things came together to provoke that experience. And from what I can see, I'd been on the edge of it for a long time, and I just popped and it just went through, and that energy through my brain never stopped. And now it's a beautiful and comfortable and transcending type experience. But at the time, it was terrifying. All right, holographic breathing. Now you can, we're not moving the jaw yet, just get the lips correct and the tongue correct. The lips are closed all of the time. Relaxed and closed. The tongue is on the roof of the mouth. The tip of the tongue is touching or close to the front teeth. The upper surface of the tongue is on the roof of the mouth, and as much as feels comfortable over a period of time, the whole of the tongue will cover the roof of the mouth. But to start off with, it's important that it's comfortable. So as much of the tongue on the roof of the mouth as feels comfortable. The breath is through the nose. Now, there is a movement of the jaw to go with this, but unless you actually know holographic breathing, if you know holographic breathing, you can just do that. For the people who don't, it's much better to wait until I start the exercises and just get used to having your tongue on the roof of the mouth, your lips relaxed and closed, the breath through your nose. And then what is going to go along with that is that on the in-breath, the jaw very gently opens. And on the out-breath, the jaw very gently closed. And it's a small motion of the jaw, about 2 or 3 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch, something like that. It's very subtle. So, and while doing that, the lips are closed, the tongue is on the roof of the mouth. Now, one of the main things that happens when people learn this is that it's fine before they do it, but they start doing the exercise and they start saying, it's impossible to have the tongue on the roof of the mouth, the lips closed, and open and close the jaw without the lips opening and closing with it. So I want everybody have your lips closed, gently move the jaw up and down in a small way and keep the lips closed, a bit like chewing. And notice you can do a small chewing motion and it's easy to keep the lips closed, kind of up and down with the jaw. So it's easy to do. Put your hand up if you can't do that. Nobody can't do that. Very good. All right, I'm just going to demonstrate it just for 3 or 4 breaths so you can see it's a very subtle motion. The lips stay closed, the breath is through the nose, a gentle motion of the jaw. Okay. And straight away it becomes deeply relaxing and deeply meditative. So we're going to go into the learning of that now. Is there any questions before we go into this meditation and the learning of that? I will give a list of exercises to go with the motion and everything. Put your hand up if you want to say anything. No one. All right. This is deeply relaxing. If it's your first time, do it sitting up. If you're lying down, there's a good chance you'll miss some important bits. After you've actually learned it and it started, then you can do it walking, lying down, sitting up, however you want. But through the initial learning of it, it's good to be upright, and then you're less likely to pass out. There's a certain point when it changes from being an exercise just to being this totally natural breath that integrates with the movement of your breath through the whole body. And you need all of the different bits in place for that to happen. So functionally, for your first time, good to be sitting up and being aware. All right, so we will begin. Closing your eyes and breathing gently. The tongue is on the roof of the mouth. The lips are relaxed and closed, and we're going to bring in some resources. So sending a smile, sending some energy to the earth, and let the earth say hello back. Allow yourself to receive from the earth. Notice what that feels like through your body and through your energies. And then sending a smile, sending some energy to the higher self and the beneficial energies. And allow the higher self and beneficial energies to send you some energy back. Allow yourself to communicate with the higher self and beneficial energies. The beneficial energies are any channels you like to work with or any beneficial higher energies. There we go, lovely. The whole screen melts when people do that. So the eyes are closed, having your eyes closed, your lips are closed and relaxed, the tongue is relaxed and on the roof of the mouth. And now just keeping that in place, just gently moving the jaw up and down as if you're chewing, but very gentle, slow, vertical motion of the jaw up and down. Notice you can do that. You can keep the lips closed, you can keep the tongue on the roof of the mouth, and you can gently move the jaw up and down. The breath is through the nose. Now we're going to synchronize the breath with the movement of the jaw. So as the jaw is opening, notice how this pulls the breath in through the nose. So the jaw is slowly opening, and this draws the breath in through the nose. As the jaw is slowly closing, this expels the breath out through the nose. The jaw relaxes open. The breath comes in through the nose. The jaw relaxes closed. The breath comes out through the nose. For this to work, the lips need to be relaxed and closed all of the time. The tongue needs to be relaxed and on the roof of the mouth. And if you're having any difficulty with it at all, make the movement smaller, slower, and more gentle. Jaw gently opening. The breath comes in through the nose. The jaw is gently closing. The breath comes out through the nose. Relax the back of the neck. Relax the back of the head. Now we're going to change the whole emphasis of that. We're going to bring the emphasis to the breath, and the jaw will move with the breath rather than the other way around. So now, being aware of the breath coming in through the nose, and as it comes in, the jaw relaxes open. Being aware of the breath leaving through the nose, and the jaw relaxes closed. Notice how the whole quality changes. It becomes much softer, becomes much more meditative, and the jaw just follows the breath. Breathing in, and there's no force to it. Breathing in, the jaw relaxes open. Breathing out, the jaw relaxes closed. Relax the back of your neck. Relax the back of your head, and the channel comes in. You may not even feel it because it's like yourself on a higher level. Everything relaxes, everything softens, and the jaw just starts moving with the breath. Just feels natural. As you breathe in, the jaw relaxes open. As you breathe out, the jaw relaxes closed. As the jaw is closing, the teeth gently float together. No pressure. As you breathe out, they gently float apart. So the jaw never becomes fixed. Breathing in, teeth gently separate. Breathing out, the teeth gently come together, or they almost touch. So they're almost touching, but not quite. So after a while, once it's going, just take the emphasis away from the jaw and then feeling, breathing in, the chest is opening, the jaw naturally opens with it. Breathing out, the chest is closing, the jaw gently closes with it. Breathing in, the abdomen opens, the jaw gently opens with it. Breathing out, the abdomen closes, the jaw gently closes with it. Notice how the jaw just becomes part of the movement of the breath through the whole body. It just becomes one moving breath that the jaw is part of. Starts off coming from the jaw to initiate that feeling and movement. But once that feeling and movement is going, then the jaw is just part of a whole breathing motion and feeling through your whole body. Relax the back of your neck. Relax the back of your head. Relax your whole body. Through and through. Let that relaxation go through everything. Let that energy go through everything. Relax your spine. Relax your brain. Notice in a very subtle way your whole face has started to breathe. The whole cranium has started to breathe. The spine is breathing. Everything is breathing, and the jaw is just going along as part of it. The lips stay closed and relaxed all of the time. The tongue stays relaxed and on the roof of the mouth all of the time. You may feel energies rising up your spine and through your brain and connecting up to the higher self. Let your brain relax. Notice that energy traveling through your brain, pulsing through your brain. You get these waves of energy that knocks you into a deeper place every time it rides through your spine and brain. Notice how nice that feels. Okay, and feeling the sides of your cranium as if they can open on the in-breath. If they can close on the out-breath, and the sides of your jaw and face, if they open out to the sides on the in-breath, closing immediately on the out-breath. And your whole body opening out to the sides as you breathe in, closing immediately as you breathe out. To whatever level you can feel that, it's fine. You may not feel it much to start off with. As well as the opening and closing of the jaw, there's an opening and closing to the sides. It all opens to the sides on the in-breath, and it closes back to the middle on the out-breath. Relax your neck, relax your spine. And inside of those bones, is a layer of cranial fluid. Cranial fluid is almost water. It's 99% water, and this water runs around the whole brain, around the whole spine. You can feel this motion of your cranium and body ventilating the fluid around your brain. And this fluid is like a channel. It channels spiritual energy. And then inside the brain, there's two ventricles out to the sides and then two ventricles on the center line. These are big caves full of cranial fluid, and this runs down the center of the spine. You have all of that cranial fluid around the brain, in the ventricles and down the center of the spine. And this is all enclosed in a sheath, a dural sheath around the whole thing. Now, notice that your whole brain is like the sea. The cells of the brain are like seaweed and sea anemones, and the whole brain is full of this very same cranial fluid, and the whole spine is full of this very same cranial fluid. The brain and spine are 90% water. It's like the sea. Notice it's no longer just the ventricles and around the brain. The whole brain is full of this water sea, the whole spine, and it's breathing. It's opening and closing. And it connects to the earth and it connects to the higher energies. Breathing in, out to the sides, it's ventilating this fluid and it's ventilating the brain. And notice it's all held within this sheath around the brain and around the spine. And now just let that, every nerve is like capillaries, allowing that cranial fluid to travel out through the nerves, through the cranial nerves, through the whole face, through the spinal nerves, out through the arms and legs and chest, everywhere. Just this light and water travels out through the nerves. Notice if your breath gets any deeper. Feeling this cranial breath in your brain, of whole brain, all around the brain, in the ventricles, within the brain, within the spine. It's cranial fluid. And then that flowing off down through your nerves. And that it has an energy, it has an intelligence. And the nerves spread out to every cell through your whole body. And you have a connection from the higher. This is a portal for the energies, the higher self to drop down into this water in your brain and out through the nerves and out through your body. Then just feel as if it's not going out through the nerves. It's just all held in the dural membrane around the brain and around the spine. Notice how that feels like. Notice what happens to your breath if it becomes easier or harder to breathe. Now let it just be around the spine and around the brain and in the ventricles. Notice what that does to your breath, how good that feels. Notice what that feels like. And the true anatomy of it is that it's around every cell. It spreads out through the whole brain, through the whole spine. It is 90% water. Allow it to spread out. Notice what happens to your breath as that water, it's salt water, fills around every cell in the brain, every cell through the spine. They're like sea anemones, 90% water, still encased in the dural sheath around, isolating it. And now let it spread off through the brain stem, out through all the nerves in the face, then out through all the nerves, through the spine, spreading out through the arms, the chest, the organs, the pelvis, the legs. Notice what that feels like as that water travels off. Imagine it like capillaries, taking water, salt water, out through your whole body. And this water is a channel. Water channels spirit. Water channels the higher self and the beneficial energies. And this water becomes a channel to heal your whole body. It also becomes a channel to offload the toxins, the neurotoxins, the carbon dioxide from your brain. Notice how easily your brain starts to be able to offload toxins, illnesses, maybe viruses even. In my case, Lyme's disease. So there's that. You can release the toxins out. You can also just channel light through that water out to every cell in your body. Gently breathing. Notice how full your breath is. Okay, we're going to come back in about a minute. So letting that soften. Gently being with the holographic breathing. And when you feel ready, gently allowing yourself to come back. Okay. There is some ventricles. This is the cranium, and it will go around like that. And there's two lateral ventricles here in either lobe of the brain. You've got a central ventricle there. This, if you're looking face on, this makes a big diamond shape. and then that goes down through the spine. So all of this, that's what I was taught in, that's what we were taught in a 2-year cranial practitioner training, then a 1-year advanced cranial training. I knew nothing about the cranial fluid in the brain. I think this was the first picture I painted. So here we have a ventricle here. All the brain cells, these are like sea anemones, and this is all cranial fluid. This cranial fluid here is exactly the same as this cranial fluid. There's no difference. I didn't know what cranial fluid was. I was just thought, is my sound okay? Can you hear me okay? Yeah? All right. I was just taught it was the most refined fluid in the body, which I don't actually think is true. I didn't know what the constituent parts is. But when a fluid in the body is refined, that means it's just got a higher water content. Cranial fluid, it's like mineral water. It's 99% water. And then the 1% is oxygen, glucose, and salt. And then there's other different things that go with that. But those are the main ingredients. The cranial fluid produced in the ventricles, 99% water, and then it's oxygen, salt, and glucose. The cranial fluid produced in the brain, 99% water and 1% salt, oxygen, and glucose. They're the same fluid. Put your hands up if it felt nicer feeling all of the cranial fluid than just feeling the cranial fluid in the ventricles. Put your hands up if that felt better. Brilliant. Put your hands up if it felt better, when you felt it going out through the nerves, there was a big relief as it all traveled out through the nerves. Put your hands out if you felt that. Okay, some people. All right. For the new people just getting used to holographic breathing, you may only be minimally feeling this. Right. We're going to go into the anatomy of this, you know, to show you this. I have got to show you the anatomy. But I'm going to explain it in an easy to see way. I can take these off to start off with. Imagine a factory, and it's producing soda pop or something like that. And there's this machine that makes the soda, and then that soda fills up this huge container. So there's pipes going from the soda making machine into this great big contained container. And then out of the container, there's more pipes, and they come to where that soda is put into bottles. Now, say just to get a figure, the soda making machine makes 100 liters of soda an hour. So there's 100 liters of soda flowing into this big sealed containers. And then the pipe coming out of the container to bottling it, that only takes 50 liters an hour. So you've got 100 liters going into this container, you've got 50 liters coming out every hour. What do you think is going to happen with that container? Put your hands up if you think that container is going to explode or something like that. Most people. You have to think for this. So, okay. That is how exactly, pretty well exactly how they describe the brain and cranial fluids working. There's 100 liters, whatever, going in, but actually there's only a way of getting 50 liters out. That's exactly how it's described. And we'll go into that when I show you the anatomy. And everybody, no one questions it. Then say with this big container, you've got your 100 liters going in, 50 liters going out, and then you find some other tubes that will take another 50 liters and take that extra fluid. And it would explain why your big container isn't exploding, because it's probably going out through this other pipe, which would exactly take 50 liters an hour. So that was there. But the whole people who designed this machine, they say, no, that other pipe would take it. That doesn't work. It only goes out through the 50 liters one, and you're scratching your head. That would sound a bit weird. Put your hands up if that sounds a bit weird. Come on, more people can put, okay, good. Join in. So then you look at it again, and you've got a pipe coming in with 100 liters. You've got your 50 liters coming out another pipe. And then the other pipe that they say doesn't work, it comes actually inside the container, and inside the container, it's full of soda. It's got an open hole to the outside where that pipe continues, but the soda is only in the pipe inside, but as far as the manufacturer says, it won't flow out through the rest of the pipe. Put your hands up if you think that's weird. That is exactly how the brain and cranial fluids is described in the anatomy books. So that was a simplified version. I'm going to show you the anatomy behind that. And I'm happy if you're an advanced anatomy person and I'm wrong, you can tell me, it's okay. So you may learn more anatomy, well, you will learn more anatomy about the cranial fluid in this than I learned in a 3-year training. I don't know about the trainings now, but you will learn more about the cranial fluid in this hour or so than I learned in 3 years. Now, first we're going to talk about the body. You've got the blood coming out the heart, and this flows around the body into tiny little capillaries. I think it's like 1,500 miles of tiny little capillaries. When it's leaving the heart, it's got this strong pressure and it's flowing out very quickly. By the time it's gone through these over 1,000, I think it's over 1,000 miles of little capillaries that are only wide enough for one cell to go through, that pressure has gone down by 90%. If it was coming out as a pressure of 10 from the heart, by the time it's gone through the capillaries, it's down to 10% of that. So if it was 10 there, it will be 1 at the capillaries. So there's very little pressure. The fluid comes out from the capillaries, the interstitial fluid that flows around the cells, carries oxygen, carries nutriments, goes into the cells, it gives them life. Then after it's done that, it comes back out the cells, it's carrying toxins, it's carrying carbon dioxide. So you've got it coming from the heart here, the arterial blood. That fluid has got so much little pressure, and there's so little pressure in the venous blood going back. The venous blood can't take all of that fluid back because the pressure is right down, it's flowing really slowly, so it comes out fast and strong, lots of fluid, goes back through the venous blood. It can't take that same amount of fluid. So what happens is the fluid that doesn't go back in the venous blood goes back through the lymph. So you've got the arterial blood coming out fast, the venous blood coming back slow, the lymph coming back slower. proportionally size-wise, if that is the arterial blood, this will be the volume of lymph. There's 4 times the size of lymph as there is of the arterial blood, and 4 times the size of lymph as there is venous blood. So it comes out of here. Some goes back as venous blood, some goes back as lymph. In the brain, same thing happens. I think it's about 400 miles of capillaries. Strong, no, it needs lots of oxygen, needs lots of, it works on glucose, it's a refined area. You get this massive blood flow to the brain, to the spine. 400 miles of capillaries is down to 10% of the pressure. That comes back, it goes out, it produces cranial fluid, water, oxygen, glucose, salt, some other things. And then after it's fed the brain cells, the oxygen and glucose goes into the brain cells, produces carbon dioxide, that comes back through the venous blood. The venous blood leaving the brain is going so slowly sometimes that it even goes backwards. So the venous blood can't take all of that fluid back up. So we're left with this volume. You've got that coming to the brain, you've got that leaving the brain as venous blood, and then you've got that volume of fluid going back to the heart somehow. Put your hands up if you know how that area gets back to the heart. Put your hands up if you know how that gets back to the heart from the brain. Well, I've got to tell you something. You're not alone, because the scientists don't know how that volume of fluid gets out to the heart. Not only do they not know, they just totally ignore it. They've made a complete model of the brain and nervous system that's got arterial blood arriving, venous blood leaving at 10% of the pressure, sometimes going backwards. And as far as they're concerned, all of the fluid from the arterial blood is leaving by the venous blood. Put your hands up if that makes sense to you. That does make sense to people. It shouldn't. It's impossible. And you know, we've got this, like our container, that's the 100 liters arriving. This is the 50 liters leaving. And if it was just that, the container would explode. Now you've got these other pipes leaving the container, which are the nerves. That's the only other, you've got pipes coming in and out, which are the venous blood and the arterial blood, and then it's all sealed, and then you've got the nerves coming out. They're the only other pipes coming out, and they're perfectly capable of taking fluid. You would have thought the scientists would say, well, that fluid travels out through the nerves. Any sensible person, anybody who's got O-level physics would say, well, probably that fluid is going out through the nerve. But no, science says no, the cranial fluid does not flow out through the nerves. It does not flow out through the dural sea. It all arrives in the arterial blood. It all leaves in the venous blood. And we're going to deny that this area in the middle, 4 times the size of the venous blood and 4 times the size of the other, we're going to pretend that that doesn't exist. And that is in every anatomy book in the whole world. And they pile out this rubbish. There's one, I mean, for me, this is the 8th wonder of the world. One, that they managed to put that in the anatomy books. And secondly, that they managed to get everyone to believe it. I find it quite incredible. Now, you can look this up. You can research this. If you think I've got it wrong, please tell me, because I would like to know, because otherwise it will then stop me feeling nutty if I find out there is a way that the scientists are right. But from all of the research I've done, there's that much lymph compared to that. It's equivalent, not including that in the dynamics of the brain and the cranial fluid, is equivalent to saying you don't know that the lymph exists. It is equivalent to that. No one says a word in the whole world. No one stands up and says, hang on, what are these scientists talking about? That's rubbish. No, and they teach it in all the osteopathic schools. They teach it in the cranial. I was taught it for 3 years. So we're you're getting 10 years of annoyance now. You're getting 10 years of me shouting at this at people and then saying, so? All right. Let's look at this. Now there's that basic lie. I'll tell you what this reminds me of. There's the when at first, what a wicked web we lead when we first learn to deceive. Because you've got that basic lie, and then they've had to make up all sorts of other lies to cover their first lie. So let's look at a picture of how they show it. So firstly, to cover up that lie, they divide the fluids. Even though they're exactly the same fluid, they divide it into cranial fluid that does nothing. It just goes on an impossible journey. It is full of nutriments and oxygen that aren't used, and it leads through the venous blood that's actually intended for the brain. So the blood for the brain, the venous blood from the brain can't leave through it. But let's just look at the journey it takes. And so here it is. And I'll just show you the picture. I'm just going to call it lies until someone tells me different. I'm just going to call it lies. This image is lies. And as far as I'm concerned, this will block up people's energies because it's just not true. And you can't really see the ventricles, but the cranial fluid, as it's called in here, is produced in the ventricles here, comes down one side of the spine, all the way down the spine, all the way up the other side of the spine, and then out right to the top of the head and out through the venous blood here. Now that looks kind of possible when you look at this section of the spine. It looks possible that it's going to go down and up the other side. This picture is built to deceive. Let's look at that in real life. Here we have, this pipe is about the same length. I haven't got, it is the same width as the dural tube. Now, can you imagine pouring a fluid in the top of that and trying that to go all the way down one side of this spine, all the way to the bottom, round the bottom, then up the other side without, if you had a red fluid and a white fluid, could you pour it so the red fluid went right down one side to the bottom, round the bottom and up the other side? Put your hands up if you think you could do that. No one. Because I don't believe the cranial fluid can do that either. That picture, you know, there's lots of tricks in that. They've made it look wider. they've made it look shorter, and they've made it look like the spine divides it in the middle, so that it's got to flow down one side and up the other side. So it's an illusion that is produced to deceive some. Can anybody see anything wrong with the bottom of that spine? Anyone? No? That spine is the spine of a newborn baby. The newborn baby, it comes right down to the bottom. By the time you're 15 or 16, the bottom third of the spine is just nerves. So not only is that fluid going down one side of the spine, there's about 50 nerves coming out the bottom of the spine. It's going down one side or half of 50 nerves on the way down, and then up the other side of through 50 nerves on the way up. And it's sealed, you know, we're told the container is sealed. So it can't go out, it can't go into, so it will just sit there forever. It's actually impossible. So the movement of it, let's look at the anatomy. I want to show, because I also want to show my side. I don't just want to show that there's just every aspect you look at in this picture is a lie, as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to spend my whole time looking at that, but I want to show you how beautiful the word, the blood-brain barrier, that for me produces a certain image. That means there's like a barrier between the brain and, or between the blood and the brain, or the blood and the cranial fluid. Let's look at what that is and how the cranial fluid is produced. The way the cranial fluid is produced, it comes into the capillaries, which are wrapped around by endothelial cells, and there's a tight junction, or there's tight junctions between them that only pure water can come out of. It's actually just another fundamental principle, is that water will travel anywhere in your body. Again, you can look that up in your anatomy book. Water will travel through any membrane anywhere in your body via osmosis. It'll either flow through, or if it's going through membranes, it will go through via osmosis. So here we have an endothelial cell with blood in the middle. You've got a tight connection at the bottom. The water will flow out all around and nothing else. Everything else is kept inside. And then the endothelial cell is intelligent, and it allows safe passage for oxygen, glucose, and salt, and they travel through the cell body, and that creates the cranial fluid in the brain. That's how it creates this rarefied fluid in the brain, because the cells have tight connections. The water can only flow through, and the water flows through the cell by osmosis, and the cell's intelligent. It lets out oxygen, glucose, and salt. That is how it's produced 400 miles of capillaries through the brain and cranial fluid. In the ventricles, the cranial fluid, you've got again, these are ependymal cells. And the ependymal cells have also got tight connections, and you've got the capillaries running inside. This is called the choroid plexus, and the blood comes out into this area, and then it goes through these tight connections and produces pure 100% water. And then the same thing, these cells allow oxygen, glucose, and salt. So you end up with 99% water, oxygen, salt, and glucose. They're exactly the same. the fluid created in the ventricles is exactly the same as the fluid created in the brain. On that journey and then they've called it two separate names, which has divided it. It's made a division in the brain. In craniosacral therapy, or my trainings, we only looked at what's called the cranial fluid. So, and if I keep calling it cranial fluid, it pulls it back into that old description. So I'm going to change the name. The name of the cranial fluid produced from the ependymal cells in the ventricles, I'm going to call epifluid from the epidermal cells. The cranial fluid that's created from the capillaries within the brain, I'm going to call the endofluid because it's through the endothelial cells. So both of these fluids are food. They're oxygen for the cells. I keep on getting these messages. I'm just going to carry on regardless. So there's, sorry, I've lost my way now. There's glucose, which feeds all of the cells. There's salt that fires the electrical charges through the axons that create the electricity through the whole brain. And so it's glucose, oxygen, and salt mainly. It's food. So, and both the epifluid and the endofluid are food and oxygen. And they create a divide by saying the epifluid travels round and is just some kind of thing that cushions the brain, cushions the spine, and then it doesn't really use that oxygen, doesn't really use that salt, doesn't use that glucose, and it comes up to the very top of the head and leads through the venous blood. So it dumps all that unused oxygen, all that unused glucose, all that unused into the venous blood. If you said that happened anywhere else in the body, you'd be called fraud or stupid. But because it's the brain, everyone believes it. If I brought out an anatomy book and I said the interstitial fluid comes out of the blood in the wrist, it flows all the way up the arm, all the way down the arm without giving any of that oxygen or nutriments to cells, and then flows into the venous blood, taking all of that with me, everyone say you're talking rubbish. But it's not questioned in the brain. It's not questioned that these fluids are exactly the same and are food. So basically, for me, I'm not going to go into, I'm losing my way a bit. I'm not going to go into all the different bits about this old picture. We're just going to look at how it can work in a new way. So that is how the fluids are produced. You can look that up anywhere. You can look up what's in those fluids. I'm just going to give them new names that will work for me in a real way. Where here we have, so this is in the spine. This is the spinal cord here. And then this is the nerves leaving, the capillary nerves leaving. This is, I mean, for me, it's all cranial C. It's epifluid and endofluid together. There is nothing to stop this traveling down the nerve. There is no membrane, no junction to stop this fluid flowing out down through the nerve. And these nerves can be long. Inside, this inside, you see, you've got the spine finishing there, and then all of these nerves traveling down inside the dura. Inside the dura, they're full of cranial fluid. They're full of cranial C. And when they come out, there's nothing to stop that cranial C coming out. But in the anatomy books and in science, they say, no, it doesn't flow out. And in a way, they're right, because the way they've described it, if they describe it as cranial fluid traveling down the outside, by naming it that, I've lost my picture now. That's upside down. See, in this picture, if I was using those old names, this would be cranial fluid and this would be interstitial fluid. And if that cranial fluid can't flow up down the nerves because it can't get in there, and if it came into the nerve, it would no longer be cranial fluid, it would be interstitial fluid. So by naming it cranial fluid, they say, no, it doesn't flow off down the nerves. But if you give it a different name, if you call it cranial C, all of this, the cranial C here can flow into that. Water can flow anywhere. There's no membrane, there's nothing to stop this flowing off down through the nerves. And that explains perfectly where this bit goes. There's this perfectly sensible explanation where this whole area can go, but they say, no, that bit doesn't exist and it can't flow down the nerves. Every anatomy book in the world says that. Everyone believes it, except for me. This is why I've gone nutty, by the way. Several things like this. Let's look, the myelin sheath. Let's look at the myelin sheath. Cross-section of a myelinated glial cell. See this here, where it's coming in? Those are tight connections. This is floating in cranial C all around it. The only thing that can go into it is oxygen, water, salt, oxygen. There'll be carbon dioxide. I think this is the same as the epi filter that makes the ependymal fluid and the endo filter that makes the endo fluid. I think this is also a filter, and what is called the myelin sheath, these filter in cranial C, salt and oxygen to feed the inside. This is a true picture of the inside of a myelinating glial cell that produced the myelin sheath. It is mainly fluid, and it can really only be similar to cranial fluid or the cranial C in the brain. And because it's a tight junction, for me, it lets in water, and then it has to, because water will osmose through everything. It will just go everywhere. And then I think it will need oxygen, it will need glucose, it will need salt to fire the charge through the axon in the middle. I think it's an intelligent cell, and it will do the same. Tight connections are not very common, but there's 3 of them in the brain. In the ependymal cells to produce the epifluid, in the endothelial cells to produce the endofluid, and all of those merging together make the cranial C. And I think this is the 3rd filter making, for me, the myelinated fluid that makes capillaries and travels out through the nerves. See, it was so real to me, my experience of it traveling out through the nerves, that I was looking for a way that the cranial fluid could travel out through the nerves and stay as cranial fluid rather than mixing with the interstitial fluid in the nerves further out and just diffuse and not be cranial fluid. I was looking for a way that could stay pure. As these travel out through the nerves, even if it's just the interstitial fluid of the nerves around here, it's an intelligent, I think it keeps the environment of the brain, this sea of the brain inside it. It's a tight connection. It will only let in water, and then in the nerves, it chooses from the milky fluid that is in the nerves, chooses oxygen, salt, and glucose, and takes that environment of the cranial sea out, down through the nerves. For me, they make capillaries that they are traveling out through the nerves. Interestingly, these capillaries are 100 times as long as they're wide. So that blue bit is the beginning of a myelinated glial cell. That red bit is the middle, and that blue bit is the end. So they're really long. So there's not many joints as these travel down the nerves. And they are perfect, absolutely 100% perfect for producing capillary action. If you have little tubes that you place in water, the finer the tube is, the more the water will be pulled up against gravity along that tube. These are the same thickness as a blood capillary that only fits one cell through it. It's the same thickness, but inside, so capillary action, one, it will draw cranial fluid just as being a tube, but also it's got all of these coils inside it. If you bring two sheets of glass together and they're water, it will draw the water up the middle. So it produces the perfect environment for water to come in one end, travel down through the coils, through the different things, come to the other. Now, where these join in the brain, there's a gap because they're in cranial fluid, and it doesn't matter, or the cranial sea, it doesn't matter the axon getting in contact with the cranial sea, but here they're pulled together. And where they join in the nerves, there's thousands of little tentacles. So as the fluid comes to the end, it can go into these little tentacles, and there's a massive surface area for it to come across into the next one. So for me, the answers, all of these questions that don't make sense with the cranial fluid and how we experience it is blood comes to the brain strong and fast. It produces epifluid and it produces endofluid, which are food for the brain. I will do more of these, and I'll show you how it moves through the brain. We haven't got time to show food for the brain. And they're a channel for spiritual energy. Some of it can leave through the venous blood. 4 times the size of that is this, which the nerves could easily take. We're told, no, nothing can flow down the nerves. It's rubbish, absolute trot. The nerves are completely open. Another picture to prove my point. Hang on. Here we have a nerve that's still inside the dural sheath, that's still completely surrounded by cranial fluid. Inside the nerve, you've got the myelinated glial cells, and between the little myelinated glial cells, we've got cranial fluid. And it comes to the dura, where it's coming out through the central nervous system. We have it as it comes out, It's exactly the same thing. There's nothing to stop it. But as it gets further down the nerve, this becomes, it's got a different blood supply that is creating milky fluid, and these can absorb what they need from that and become still water, 99% water, as it travels off down through the nerves. That is a perfectly reasonable theory that makes sense. What doesn't make sense, I've lost my container, is that the blood comes to the brain, produces produces cranial fluid that does nothing, just travels around, and it produces interstitial fluid, that two completely different fluids that have different jobs, and then it all leaves in the venous blood. That doesn't make sense. It's not true. Now, I'm not saying what I have put across is true, but it's true in my experience. And teaching it like this, I think, produces a block, and people having an image of the blood-brain barrier and the myelin sheath produce a block, as far as I'm concerned. From the basics I've given you, you can make up your own version of how it works. And I'm willing to bet is better than the one in the anatomy books, or that they teach on every single cranial training that I know about. So now we're going to do I'm going to let people ask questions. Maybe someone's going to tell me I'm wrong. But then we'll do a meditation of doing that again. So I wanted to pass on that anatomy. I think I just wanted to get that off my chest. I think people should know. I think this webinar should be full of cranial practitioners actually getting a new view of how the cranial system should work. So absolutely, and words, naming things, really important. If you name one fluid in the brain interstitial and the other fluid not interstitial, you instantly think the other fluid isn't interstitial, and they're both exactly the same thing. By naming them differently, you divide people's image of the brain. Not only do you divide the image of the brain, you think people, well, there's this clear fluid flowing around the brain, and then the brain is solid, rather than that fluid traveling through the whole thing, and the brain is fluid with fluid around it. These are all images that affect our health and our spiritual well-being. Jobby, we're going to do a meditation. Stay for it as long as you want. Now you've got an image of how it can flow down the myelin capillaries. It will help to give you an image of how that cranial fluid, or how that cranial sea, can stay pure as it travels out through the nerves. Now, I'm not saying I'm right, but it makes pretty good meditations. All right, okay, we're going to go. So closing your eyes and dropping into the holographic breathing. The eyes are closed, the lips are closed, the tongue is on the roof of the mouth. On the in-breath, the jaw is gently opening. On the out-breath, the jaw is gently closing. Feeling the sideways motion of the jaw, of the sides of the cranium, of the sides of the body, opening on the in-breath, closing on the out-breath. Become aware of that fluid around the brain, the cranial sea around the brain, and the cranial sea around the spine. Become aware of the ventricles in the brain and the cranial fluid down the middle of the brain, or the cranial sea down the middle of the brain. Then let that expand out through the whole brain and the whole spine. So it's all fluid. It's all the same fluid. It's one fluid that transports through all of it. It's one fluid that channels an energy. Notice what that feels like as it all becomes one fluid. You can flow around between all the glial cells. You can ventilate the glial cells and they can get oxygen and glucose, and they can let off carbon dioxide and toxins. All one fluid, breathing with the cranial fluids and the holographic breathing. And then letting that flow off down through the nerves. And then in the nerves, you have all of these thousands or millions of capillaries. Keep that as pure water, salt, oxygen, glucose, so the cranial sea continues out through all of the myelinating capillaries and the myelinating fluid traveling out through the nerves. Now we'll do it later, but this fluid spirals in and it spirals out, which creates an energy. So letting your myelinating capillaries breathe, let the myelinating fluid travel down through the myelinating capillaries, just slowly from one cell to the next. And it's pulled by capillary action out through the whole body, through these millions or billions of little capillaries. Notice how healing that is for the nerves, that every nerve strand is surrounded by pure water, by cranial sea, as it travels out through your body. And let that release through your neck. And know the cranial nerves and these millions of little capillaries full of cranial sea flowing out with capillary action through the face to all of the nerves, to the throat, to all of the organs, through the arms and legs, the hands and feet, the whole body. Wherever there's a cell, there's a nerve capillary close by, carrying this very precious myelinating fluid, which is the same as the cranial sea. You've got the epifluid, the endofluid, and the myelinating fluid. They're all exactly the same thing, flowing out from the brain, from the spine, through all the millions or billions of little myelin capillaries and myelin fluid through the whole body. And the light and spirit travels through water, and especially well through salt water, healing your whole body. Right to the tips of your fingers, right to every organ. And then when it comes to the very end of those little capillaries, a little drop of cranial sea comes out the end, flows out the end of that last capillary to whatever cell it's meeting with. And through all of these nerves, through all of these capillaries, the excess fluid is flowing out through the sides of the nerves, and it's being picked up by the lymph in the body. So the cranial sea is flowing out through the nerves, out through the sides of the nerves into the lymph, and this lymph is making its way back to the heart, where it comes into the blood, and that blood is pumped to the brain and produces epifluid and endofluid. And that epifluid and endofluid flows through the brain, flows through the spine, and then flows out through all the myelinating capillaries, out through the whole body. And it connects to the higher self, the higher energies. Not only do the higher energies travel down it, the lower energies travel back the other way. The lower energies can release and travel up through the spine, through the nerves, connect through the brain, and then connect to the higher self. So you have the earth and the higher self connecting through an unbroken body of fluid, cranial sea, not produced by the blood-brain barrier, produced by the epifilter, the endofilter, and the myelinating filter. New names, new picture. Notice how healing this picture is. You can go back to the old picture if you want, but I'm keeping this one. Really feeling it coming out through the neck. Notice all of those millions or billions of myelinating capillaries coming out. It's the thyroid coming out, feeding the neck, feeding the thyroid with light and channeled energy. And breathe. Okay, it's releasing quite strongly through people's brains. Let that release. The energy is rising and releasing through people's brains. Let your brain release. Let all these cells are floating in this sea of light fluid. Let all of those cells release. See how this picture heals your brain. Letting all of those brain cells release and the energy releasing up through your body, go through those glial cells, and then let that connect through the top of the head to the higher energies and beneficial energies. Gently breathing with the holographic breathing. And just breathing however it feels good. There's a lot more awareness. People have been aware of the fluids. Quite a lot more awareness now moving through the neurons, through the axons in the brain, through the glial cells of the brain are being activated. The fluids around them, the myelinating glial cells are both, they're fluid and cells. And it's activating your glial cells of the brain. Once you're viewing the glial cells, you're viewing the anatomy of your mind, the anatomy of your intellect. And that gives rise, that melts and becomes a connection to the higher self and beneficial energies. You feel every myelinating capillary spreading out through the whole body. And the energy in the myelinating capillaries is also moving into something more solid. People are becoming aware of the axons that travel down the center of each one. As people become aware of their anatomy that thinks. Just by having a newer picture, a new vision, you can awaken. Let your brain awaken. Okay, letting that slow down. We'll come back in about a minute. Just relax, breathing. Okay, sending a thank you to the earth, a thank you to the higher self, a thank you to the beneficial energies, and letting the energies go off for love and healing to the earth, for love and healing to the higher self and beneficial energies. And letting yourself be loved and healed. Letting the energies go out to all sentient beings for love and healing. And you are a sentient being, allowing yourself to be loved and healed. And when you feel ready, gently allowing yourselves to come back.